You step off the transport aircraft, and the dry heat hits your face like a physical blow. The air smells of boiled cabbage, diesel exhaust, and the faint, acidic sting of gunpowder from a firefight that happened 3 days ago. Your blood is practically vibrating. You have 210 rounds of 5.56 ammunition strapped to your chest. You are a coiled spring. You are ready. You are exactly what they built you to be. When you try to explain it to civilians, or even to the guys who actually saw the Red Temple of Mars, they look at you sideways. The closest analogy you can find is being a college athlete. You sacrificed everything. Late nights, early mornings, you missed your sister's wedding. You watched your relationships dissolve into folded letters and static-filled phone calls. You gave them your knees, your back, your youth. You put your absolute everything into the sport, but you sat on the bench your entire career. You never got to get in the game. That is the phantom weight you carry, the invisible wound of the peacetime deployment or the combat tour where the combat simply forgot to find you. You wash the dust of 3 continents off your body armor, but you cannot wash away the feeling of illegitimacy. Week 2. The sirens shatter the night. The Scud missile alarm. Your heart hammers against your ribs so hard it hurts. You scramble in the dark, shoving your face into a protective mask, ripping the charging handle of your weapon back. You rush to the sandbag bunker, adrenaline flooding your veins, preparing for the end of the world. And then, you sit there. For 4 hours, you sit in the dark. It was a drill, or the missile landed 50 miles away in empty sand. The adrenaline sours in your stomach. Your hands stop shaking, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. The military prevented you from acting, and the culture prevents you from processing the absolute absurdity of being wired for violence with nowhere to put it. This is where the quiet dread begins to take root. It is not the terror of bullets snapping past your head. It is the agonizing, slow drip erosion of waiting. The military is a vast machine, and the vast majority of it is logistics, paperwork, and waiting in line. You learn the intimate geography of boredom. You clean a weapon that has never been dirty. You sweep sand out of a tent built on sand. You spend weeks on field ops that realistically accomplish nothing but checking a box for a higher-up who was bored. You mop floors in body armor. It feels like playing dress-up. It feels like a betrayal of the oath you swore, even though you are doing exactly what you are told. You are a ghost haunting a forward operating base. Then comes the radio watch. 3 a.m. The rest of the outpost is asleep. The blue hour casts a cold, melancholic glow over the communication console. The only sound is the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the generator and the harsh burst of static. This is where the real war happens for you, not through the sights of a rifle, but through a plastic earpiece. A voice floods the headset, frantic, breathless. A patrol has made contact outside the wire. You hear the sharp, rhythmic popping of heavy machine guns echoing through the microphone. You hear a young man, a kid you ate breakfast with just hours ago, screaming for air support, screaming for a medic. The voice stress analysis graph in your mind spikes into the deep red, and you are sitting in a perfectly climate-controlled room, staring at a green screen. You are perfectly safe. You are surrounded by concrete blast walls, and you have never felt more useless in your entire life. You track their grid coordinates, you relay the messages to command, but you cannot pull a trigger to save them. You cannot throw your body between them and the shrapnel. You just listen. This is moral injury. It is a damage done to the soul. It is the disruption of your own expectation that you would be the shield for the men on your left and right. Instead, you are just a witness, a stenographer to their suffering. You log the casualties on a spreadsheet while the echo of their panic rings in your ears. A month later, you are assigned to a logistics convoy. Finally, you are outside the wire. You are in the turret of a Humvee. The convoy is moving fast. Suddenly, the 2.5-ton truck ahead of you hits a massive rut and fishtails violently in the dirt. A massive cloud of smoke and sand erupts into the blinding daylight. You grip the spade grips of your heavy weapon, bracing for the ambush, screaming contact into your comms. But the dust settles. It was just a blown tire. No IED, no enemy combatants hiding in the tree line, just the ghost of a threat. You untense your shoulders, but the phantom adrenaline leaves you feeling hollowed out and exhausted. You return to base. You see the medic walking toward the surgical tent. His silhouette is slumped in the fading light. The heavy medical bag swings at his side, stained with something dark that looks black under the ambient lights. You step out of his way. You avert your eyes. You shrink back into the shadows of the motor pool, because there is a hierarchy of suffering here, and you know exactly where you rank. You didn't bleed. You didn't apply a tourniquet to a bleeding man. You didn't hold anyone's hand as they faded. You just drove a truck full of rations. You start to crave it. It is a dark, shameful envy that you would never admit out loud. You crave the rite of passage into the temple of Mars. You wonder what would have felt like enough if you had called in an airstrike, if you had fired just one shot in anger. You look at the sergeant, his broad silhouette illuminated by the harsh overhead practical light of the command tent, clutching a clipboard full of casualty reports. You wish your name was on that clipboard, just to prove you were actually here, just to prove that the uniform you wear isn't a costume. You stand on the flight line for the ramp ceremonies, the metal boxes draped in flags moving slowly up the ramp of the C-117 cargo plane. The engines whine in the cold night air. You snap a salute. Your arm is rigid, but inside, a toxic mix of sorrow and survivor's guilt is hollowing you out. Why them, you think? Why not me? I was right here. I was armed to the teeth. I was ready to go. It should have been me. You carry the lives of those soldiers with you. The guilt components fuse with pathological shame. The deployment ends just like that. You don't get a grand cinematic finale, no heroic last stand. The calendar simply runs out of days. You pack your unblemished gear into a duffel bag. The nylon is barely scuffed. You get on a plane, you fly home across the ocean. The transition is jarring, brutal in its sudden mundanity. You walk through an airport terminal and a stranger sees your uniform. They smile, they buy your coffee, they shake your hand with profound sincerity. They say, "Thank you for your service." And then they ask the question, the one you dread above all others. Did you see any action over there? The question hangs in the air, suffocating you. You smile a tight, practiced smile. No, you say, I was just support. But what you want to say is that you stood the watch. What you want to say is that you listened to men die over a radio and couldn't sleep for a year, that you still hear the static. But you swallow it, because in the eyes of society, if you didn't pull a trigger, your war doesn't count. You feel like a fraud in your own mind. You retreat into isolation. You avoid the veteran organizations. You avoid the guys with the combat patches, convinced that your trauma is illegitimate. You suffer from role guilt. You feel you didn't sacrifice enough. You downplay your own problems. But the truth is, the military is a machine that demands absolute submission. You signed the contract. You wrote the blank check, payable up to and including your life. It is not your fault the government never cashed it in blood. You went where you were ordered. You stood ready. You reach into the breast pocket of your old fatigues hanging in the closet. You pull out the folded letter, the one you wrote on the second night of the deployment, the one you kept pressed against your chest plate for 9 months. You unfold the brittle, creased paper. It wasn't a letter to your mother or your wife telling them you loved them in case you died. It was a letter of apology, an apology to the men who would take the bullets you didn't, an apology for surviving intact. You read the words now, years later in the quiet safety of your civilian home. And finally, the perspective shifts. You realize the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. You were a force multiplier. Because you pulled security on that gate, someone else slept. Because you drove that logistics truck, someone else ate. Because you manned that radio at 3 in the morning, someone else had a lifeline in the dark. You didn't fail the test. The test was simply different than you imagined. You fold the letter back up. You place it on the table. The phantom adrenaline is gone. The quiet dread has finally broken. You let go of the phantom rifle you've been carrying for years. The guilt of surviving a war you never fought begins to lose its teeth. You served honorably. You stood in the gap. You were the silent architecture that kept the front line from collapsing. And as you turn off the lamp, casting the room into a deep, peaceful silhouette, you realize the ultimate truth about the nature of human conflict. The battlefield is not a courtroom. The uniform is not a judge. The men who didn't make it back wouldn't want you to drown in the shame of your own survival. They would want you to live the life they were denied. You never fired a shot, and maybe in the grand calculus of violence, that is not a failure. That is a quiet mercy, because as the old philosophy goes, war does not determine who was right, it only determines who was left.